Welcome to Purpose 360. I'm Carol Cohn.
And I'm Chris Noble.
And we're on a journey to explore the brightest and most innovative minds and initiatives in social purpose.
Today, companies and brands must stand for something meaningful. They have to have a social purpose and bring that purpose forward to their employees, their customers, and their community.
Each episode, we're talking to leaders at Fortune 100 companies, global brands, social enterprise startups, NGOs, and everything in between.
We'll be taking a deep dive to learn how they are integrating purpose into their organizations
to benefit both business and society for enduring impact. Join us. Welcome to Purpose 360. I'm Carol Cohn, and I have a marvelous guest with me today. Gary Hirshberg from Stonyfield Organic Yogurt. Gary is an old friend. We got to work together, some decades ago when Stonyfield was in its earliest years. And I ran into Gary at an event recently in Boulder, and I just said, would you come on the show? And he said, absolutely. So Gary's the chief organic optimist at Stonyfield. He founded the firm in 1983. He's got a ton of firsts he's going to talk about today. Gary, I'd just like to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Carol. And just to be clear, I was co-founder with Samuel Kamen.
Oh, with Sam,
Samuel,
of course.
yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And Sam retired some years ago, didn't he?
He did. He right before our sale to Danone in 2001.
Yeah, and the two of you were a dynamic duo then, and you've contributed so much to the organic industry. Tell us a little bit about your background before Stonyfield, and why did you get this love of organic and dairy?
Well, it's whenever I'm asked this question, I'm not sure how far to go back, but let me give it a shot. Meaning I grew up in New Hampshire, and in my childhood, as in yours, we watched, of course, the absolute decline of family farmers and really agriculture in general in our region. But by the time when I was a kid, there were thousands of working dairy farms in New Hampshire. We used to get our chickens and our turkey and our eggs all literally right down the street from us or road from us. And by the time I was emerging from adolescence, we were down to the hundreds of dairy farmers left in the state. And by the time Samuel had the inspiration to start Stonyfield out of his rural education center, and I was one of his trustees, we were down, well below that. When I went off to college, I thought really business and commerce were the source of all of those problems, all the pollution, the demise of farms, the demise of rural land, and just all the kind of environmental threats. And remember, this is the 70s we're talking about, so this was all the kind of questioning authority period. And so I thought I would run as far away from business as I possibly could, and I actually got into science, studying climate change. And after college, I went to work at and eventually became executive director of an ecological research institute on Cape Cod called the New Alchemy Institute, where we learned and we advanced different ideas of how to grow food and fuel and treat waste with no use of pollutants, with completely solar and renewable powered systems for food and energy. And I learned that it could all be done scientifically, at least. What as time went on, and I was, of course, the executive director, therefore responsible for raising money, I recognized that we didn't exactly have a business model. We had a scientific model.
Right.
And coincidentally, Ronald Reagan became president during my tenure. And as I mentioned before, I was a trustee of Samuel's Organic Farming School, where I used to go up to his little nonprofit and sit at board meetings where he would feed us this extraordinary yogurt from his one cow, the Lilybell.
One cow operation.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, it was, part of it was his school. He was demonstrating all kinds of ways of growing food ecologically. And when Reagan came in, both of our organizations, my institute and his center both became very in trouble in terms of revenue, because federal funding for organic agriculture or education all dried up. To make a long story short, we had to start to come up with means of self-support. So at New Alchemy, that was publishing and consulting and selling kits for home food growing and fish farming and so on. And at the Rural Education Center, we turned one day at a board meeting and said, why don't we sell this stuff? It was just like ambrosia, this absolutely amazing yogurt. So Samuel went out and found a $35,000, got a $35,000 loan from, among others, a group of Catholic nuns who were trying to
Thank
sell.
you, the Catholic nuns.
Yes, right, the two Jewish guys with the Catholic nuns, and they were selling their monastery, Mount St. Mary's, and wanted to recycle those funds into local community development, and saw this crazy little enterprise, which really set out to be a model for how family farmers can survive. In other words, to add value on the farm, and also a model for consumers to become more conscious of. I mean, things that we take for granted nowadays weren't being used in those days. We were talking about local, we were talking about organic, we were talking about hormone-free, antibiotic-free. But in those days, people were mystified by us. But nonetheless, we were able to persuade the nuns and a couple of other investors to write a check. So I eventually wound up my duties down at on Cape Cod at New Alchemy, and joined. So the first cups of yogurt we got off the line in April of '83. I joined Samuel just a couple of months later, full time, and we've been doing this dance ever since.
That's an amazing journey to get there, and it's interesting when we get into some of the details later that you've got a 360-degree full circle of taking organic and educating, and we'll get into some of those programs. That's why we call this Purpose 360. I'd just like to commend you that when we talk to organizations about embedding their purpose into the center of their culture and their operations. And it's not about marketing, it's about engagement with their consumers and their supply chain. They always say their North Star, it's Patagonia or Unilever. But now that I've had a chance to dive back into Stonyfield, besides just eating Stonyfield, you are just right at that same level. So, congratulations to you. We're going to get into your positioning in a moment, but I'd like to just go back a step. What is your personal or professional purpose, Gary?
Well, first, thanks for that comment. Yvonne is an old friend, and I'm a lifelong admirer of all that they've done at Patagonia, and I would add Cliff Bar and a number of others to that list.
There are others, sure.
In our case, the purpose of Stonyfield has really been my life purpose. It was before, and it's been ever since. And as you say, and as we'll get into, the purpose was really the thing that not only got us to success, but it allowed us to thrive, really. And we'll talk about that. Look, I would just say very simply, we as humans have had a very flawed relationship to our planet. We think of the Earth as our subsidiary, there for the taking, there for the using, and there for the dumping. And actually, it's all wrong. Humanity is a subsidiary of a bountiful planet. And so my purpose has been to sort of correct that relationship, to get back to a place where we understand that we have this amazing bounty if we take care of it, and that ethic is at the heart of Stonyfield. Our mission from the get-go was to prove that completely organic and ecological agriculture is not only workable, but it's actually financially more viable than conventional, and that consumers need not have to sacrifice anything in terms of health and the environment when they're making their purchase choices, whether about food or anything else. So that the central mission has been to close the gap between how we consume and a kind of a more sort of a better consciousness about the planet.
You've had that commitment, way before anybody was truly into social activism. I mean, that's the shiny red object today. Companies need to see what bandwagon can I get on, and what TV spots can I do. And what's great about Stonyfield, it's not about the bragging; it's about the doing, from the product to the farmers. To the key issues that you take on. So you talk about on your website and also in your marketing materials about supporting healthy food, healthy people, and a healthy planet. And that you say that that is the center of, if you do that, a healthy business. Um, how did you embrace this idea of health as a North Star for the organization?
Well, as I mentioned, growing up, I was watching the declining health of our environment, but it was unmistakable that people's health was getting challenged as well. Seeing an explosion in cancers and asthmas and other respiratory disease, and I've long recognized that the cheapest and most effective form of healthcare is preventative care, is not getting sick in the first place. Yes, this is a virtuous circle: healthy food, healthy people, healthy planet. I mean, food is one of the primary means of us getting sick. It's also can be one of the primary means, as we now know, of being healthy. Stonyfield today supports several thousand organic family farmers who make money with much smaller herd sizes and much less acreage than their conventional counterparts who are struggling. So we've proven the economics, we've proven the viability. Organic farms give up almost nothing in yields. I say almost nothing because at times of drought, actually organic farms perform better because all that carbon they've put in the soil absorb moisture. So the point is, we've had the science, and I told you I got into climate change early. Well, organics is a path to avoiding or reversing climate change because, again, what I just said a second ago, it's all about sequestering carbon, and we now know that it's not going to be enough to just drive high mileage cars. We have to actually take the carbon and other global warming gases we've put into the atmosphere and put it back in our soil. Well, that's what organic does. That's the heart of it. So when consumers eat better food, we become less sick. When we buy organic, you not only support strong, proven environmental practices, but you improve biodiversity, you reduce water usage, you improve soil carbon sequestration, but you're also getting a whole range of macro and micronutrients that aren't available through conventional farming methods. A purchase is a vote. And so, to your question, from the very get-go, Samuel and I both understood the science. We'd seen it working on our own farms and in our own research. We knew that a handful of consumers understood this, and we just saw ourselves as educators, really just using business as our means of, as our chalkboard, if you will, to help consumers connect the dots.
And certainly purpose driven companies at the center, that they lead with the issue and that they innovate around the issue. It's not about pounding the chest. And I think that that's what always was so delightful about you and Samuel, which is that you innovated constantly. Can you talk about, it wasn't easy in the early days about organic?
Nobody knew what we were talking about back in the early 80s. Okay, I mean, now my son is a next-gen organic entrepreneur. He's launched a wonderful line of organic apple cider vinegars. It's called Ethan's. And, I often smile. Unfortunately, he grew up at Stonyfield. I mean, he was literally born on the farm. So he knows this, that it's much easier now. Of course, it's more competitive now. There's more players, but at least you don't have to educate the consumer about these basic values that you're talking about. But in our day, I always say we had a wonderful company, just no supply and no demand. I mean,
True.
really, I couldn't get farmers to use these methods. We couldn't get them. We eventually obviously did, and we persuaded them sort of one at a time. Samuel was a serious organic dairy expert, and he understood the microbiology of soils as well as anybody. But getting farmers to change those methods was tough. But we also needed to get consumers to start to recognize that there's a reason that this quart of yogurt costs $1.69 instead of the $1.29, store brand. So it not only was not easy, it was, a death. It was, it was death defying. If you listen to the How I Built This podcast on NPR, you'll get the full story here. But I mean, it was 9 years before we even made money. And so this was the irony of my life, was that I left the nonprofit world to start a business to prove that it's, to stop fundraising for myself, and B, to prove that we could be economically viable. But I kept fundraising. Now it was investment for another 9 years until we could finally prove it. But once we, by the time 1992 came around, we were at around 10 million in annual sales. That's obviously when things took off. And after that, we enjoyed even then we were growing, but we were just having a hard time making money. But we, over the 30 years, we had a 19.6% compounded annual growth rate, which is certainly the envy of any large company. And of course, that's why many large companies are now in the space, because they realize that organic and non-GMO really is a better way to grow and produce, but it's also that's where the demand and the growth is from a now educated consumer.
You have a really long view, and I really appreciate the long view that you have, both for the planet and the company's role, and even the partnership between consumers and the company. And that's the part I want to ask you about. It definitely seems like you've gotten a core audience of aware consumers that want to make healthier choices, want to make better choices for the planet, etc. Is that, first of all, how do you maintain that audience? And second, do you need to grow that audience? What are your plans for taking that vision and making it even larger and embracing more people?
The fundamental challenge, and I'll just sort of make this business point here, which I think you two will really understand. The fundamental challenge of I'll call it, broadly values-driven business, but I'll also say more specifically an organic business, is that you focus more on the supply end, right? To do things right, to inculcate those values into your product and your process. And that means you bring cost to the table. In our case, we believe that family farmers should not be an endangered species. They should be paid properly. So what that means is, right now, my milk costs 100% more than what a Chobani or a Dannon or non-organic players would be paying. So and by the way, the price that they're paying to farmers are not sustainable for farmers. I mean, we're watching them drop off at sort of catastrophic rates. We lost 13% of New England's farmers last year. So we start with the premise that it's our responsibility as a bridge between the farmer and the consumer to keep them viable. And then, of course, we're putting labor into building soils. That's more cost. So the net of all of this is that our gross margin, that is what's left after you take your revenues and then after your cost of your inputs, your goods, our gross margin is at a huge deficit to our competitors, and meaning like 10 points or 1,000 basis points. And what that means is that we can't afford advertising. I mean, in order to make a bottom line and satisfy our investors, and I know we'll get back to that, you've got to come up with more clever ways of reaching the consumer. And the good news, and Carol, you're the master, you've understood this for decades. The good news is that if you can explain your story to and really help the consumer, be fully transparent and show your value system, that has a way of attracting and bringing consumers to you. And so sort of the history of consumer products is about making stuff as cheap as you possibly can, and then using that big margin to spend as much money as possible on advertising. But the history of the organic revolution is the exact opposite. It's about doing it right and then hoping that you can help consumers to understand. What's happened today, that's the story of Stonyfield, is that we weren't necessarily the fastest growing in terms of new consumers, because of course, buy an ad on the Super Bowl, that really works. but we were the fastest growing in terms of building loyalty. And the benefit of loyalty, as Carol has preached forever, is word of mouth, right? You're much more likely to buy a product from somebody who says you really should try this or use this than a commercial or an advertisement. So the challenge today, though, just to sort of round this out, is that as I said, our time has arrived. The millennial consumer doesn't need to be explained about climate change. They've grown up knowing and understanding this, and now they've got purchasing power. They don't need to know about be told about rising cancer rates. It's happening all around them. Everybody knows somebody dealing with cancers. They don't need to be reminded about brain development and the relationship to food or autism or ADHD or any of the other problems that are resulting from our poor eating habits. But so what's happened is now we've got more competition. And so the challenge today is how you tell your story when there's 10 other organic players out there telling a similar story.
So let's go back to some of your innovations first, because I don't think that our listeners know how many firsts you had, which allowed you again to tell your story in a different way. So can you talk a little bit about packaging and Yo Baby, a little bit about that and why that was so important to creating that loyalty with your consumer?
Sure. Well, from the very beginning, of course, to my answer to Chris, we couldn't afford advertising, so we had to use our packaging. To explain our story. So our lids, the yogurt tops, were always embracing causes back in the day, anti-nuclear and anti-synthetic growth hormone and pro climate change and solar and renewable initiatives. And people hadn't seen that before. But you pick up a pack and there's a little political message on it, and it got us into trouble once in a while. When I had my annual rant on campaign finance reform, we had a lid that said, "In politics, the cream doesn't always rise to the top," as our yogurts did. It was my rant that you shouldn't have to be a millionaire to run for office, and unfortunately, our yogurts had shown up on Capitol Hill in the cafeteria just when that lid broke, and we got our yogurts returned with a note that said, "Dear Gary, it's too political for Capitol Hill," which I always loved that. I got that. But
that's a funny line right there. That's great.
Right. But it was,
Right.
that rivals the line when I wrote an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal, and we were proving all along that climate change was actually an opportunity for more profits by being more ecological and less wasteful, and to switch over to more renewable forms of energy. We were actually saving money. And so I wrote this in an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal. And the head of the editorial page wrote back, "Dear Gary, I love your yogurt. I eat it every day. I just can't stomach your views on climate change."
That's funny.
Yes. Yeah. No, we have a lot of these.
Funny.
But anyways, to come back to the point, we used our packaging to promote our mission, which again, you understand why now. I mean, this is the only way we could explain. We wanted people to pick up the cup and look at not just the potassium and the fat level, but also to see who we were. As Carol, as you said, we had this wonderful cream on top whole milk yogurt, which we discovered everybody was using to feed their babies, because babies need whole milk for brain development. And, pediatricians were recommending this product. But what they didn't like was they didn't like to feed their baby out of a large container and then close it again. So we innovated and came up with this idea of Yo Baby, which was our whole milk cream on top in small packs made, by the way, from polylactic acid, which is PLA, which is a plant-based polymer. So actually, literally, our 6 packs of yogurt are not made from plastic, or I should say 92%. It's made from plant materials. So we innovated that. We innovated, as you said, organic in tubes. We innovated organic smoothies. Not all the innovations worked. We innovated garden salad yogurt back in 1986 and spicy garden salad. And the very same day that one buyer from Demoulas said, one buyer from Purity Supreme, who was Armenian, so he was used to savory yogurts, he said, "You guys are geniuses." He said, "This is incredible." The very same day, the buyer at Jack Demoulas over at Market Basket said, "This stuff is the most disgusting thing I've ever had in my life." The problem was when the cream rose to the top, so did the herbs, so it looked like a putting green when you open it. And he said, "I'll never let you in my store again." So, I guess the story of entrepreneurship is always about, taking risk or not even seeing risk, just trying new ideas. But I think getting back to your point, Carol, and your question, Chris, I mean, this innovation wasn't just because we were clever or because we were inventive, which we were, I'd say, and are. We're doing some amazing innovation right now. But it was because, again, that's the necessity. It's how to reach a new consumer. I mean, in our day when we started, there were two kinds of yogurt, big cups and little cups, right? I mean, today there's Greek, there's spoonable, there's drinkable, there's plant-based, there's squeezable, there's yogurt in pouches. We're innovating now a completely vegetarian product in a fruit and veg product in pouches, because nowadays in the age of convenience, people it's all about one-handed eating, and parents like squeezing because the kids don't spill it all over themselves like they do with a cup and a spoon, and you must innovate to stay ahead. In our case, though, we burdened ourselves with an added criteria, which is that in my sister was our vice president of natural resources, and in the early I guess it was the early 90s, we commissioned a study at the University of Michigan to look at packaging, because of course, most consumers, when they think about doing something environmental, they think about recycling. But actually, recycling is not the greenest thing you can do. In fact, it's often not even green. There's a huge amount of energy that goes into capturing, collecting, regrinding and reusing those materials. And so what the University of Michigan study showed us, and therefore this became kind of a credo at Stonyfield, is essentially less is more. That energy is embodied. Mass is embodied energy, and so while producing in recycled materials is, of course, virtuous, if you had an efficient recapture and recycling system, actually the more profound thing you can do is just use less. There's in other words, plastic or material that will never have to be recaptured again. So we burdened ourselves because, again, we were scientists. We came at this knowing more than even, I think, the consumer understood. And so every innovation was always about reducing packaging weight and size. That's why we took those plastic overcaps off way back. We were the first to do that back in the day. And this continues. As I say, the pouches are not recyclable. We're working on a more biological solution, but they are the lightest weight. And so this is always the challenge, because the consumer, sometimes you're doing things that the consumer, doesn't get yet.
And where do you get your ideas? I mean, obviously you have amazing instincts. But also, are you in conversations with consumers? You do focus groups, you go out into the market? Because these are a lot of breakthrough ideas.
Well, back in the day, we didn't have enough consumers to talk to. I mean, of course, we got consumer feedback. Some of the other innovations were in communications, right? I mean, we at the beginning, remember, we were educators. Samuel ran a farming school. I ran an ecological research institute. So, what do you do when you're an educator? You create a newsletter. Well, remember, this was pre-internet. So back in the day, we had something called Moos from the Farm, all the moos that's fit to print. And this was and we sent this out, and we had, thousands and thousands of consumers. Remember, we used mail, like snail mail. Like, I know millennials listening don't know what I'm even talking. Well, I was about to say, one day, one of our buyers said, "What are you going to do for advertising?" And we said, "Well, we have this wonderful newsletter." He said, "Not enough." So we were driving back to the farm thinking about how to answer him, and we had to go milk our cows, and it suddenly dawned on us, let's do Adopt a Cow, which we later changed to Have a Cow. And hundreds of thousands of people did this. What you did was you sent in 5 yogurt cups, and we, of course, advertised this right on our cup and also on shelf talkers on the shelf. You could send in 5 yogurt lids. You would get a certificate naming you the co-owner of a cow, and then your cow would, in those days, send you 2 letters a year. Nowadays, of course, they tweet and they blog, and the cows it's all electronic. It's all, social media, no paper, much more green. But so, we had to come up with these kind of new ways of talking to people. But to answer you specifically, I mean, I think a lot of where our innovation came from and comes from is in the culture that we created. I mean, this has long since been a company that Samuel or Gary, are the lead creatives, and we have 400 plus people there, and the ideas come from everywhere. And I want to tell you about a really exciting one that we're working on right now, which really emerged from a group of us working together. And a lot of times, Carol, you're absolutely right. It does come from conversations with consumers. We have a very high touch company. So we were obviously, we have these thousands of family farmers who have been very aware of our and measuring very religiously the reductions in pesticides and herbicides we've been able to avoid. But we are also aware, and I've been a soccer coach. I was a soccer coach for 20 years, and all three of my kids, and we're also aware that there's another way that our children and all of us get exposed to pesticides and herbicides, and that's on our parks and our fields. And it turns out that 66% of America's parks and playing fields are treated to one of three very toxic herbicides. In one case, it's a known carcinogen, and the other two, it's a likely carcinogen. We're talking about 2,4-D, which is half of Agent Orange, okay? Dicamba and glyphosate. 66% of our playing fields are exposed. And if you stop and think about it for a second, our skin is actually the largest organ on our body. And so when you dive for a Frisbee, or your dog goes out and rolls around in the grass, or you as a little kid roll on the grass, that stuff's going directly into your bloodstream, but through contact with your skin. That means that if you come out off of a playing field with your soccer ball, your child, and or basketball or whatever, and you don't wash your hands and you eat your food with your hand, your sandwich, you're consuming glyphosate. And we now know this to be a fact. This isn't like crazy hippie stuff. This is clinically proven. So we launched a program last year called Stonyfields, which is for our 35th birthday. We've adopted 35 cities, or at the moment we're now up to 20. We have another 15 to go across America. We're in partnership with the towns and with grassroots groups, and this gets back to the point, with consumers in these towns who want to work on these kinds of things. We have helped them. We're helping them to convert their playing fields and their parks to organic. And what's exciting is, for example, we've partnered with Walmart in Salt Lake City and in Houston, Texas. When we do these fields days, thousands and thousands of people come out. By the way, the conversion to organic within 3 years, it starts saving the community's money, and the Parks and Rec folks in these communities have told us the grass is actually greener when it's been treated organic. So Adam Scott of Parks and Rec, that television program, has actually become our spokesperson for this thing, and he's out. Adam's also a father and a soccer coach, so he's out talking about it. So we're having a lot of fun. So the innovation continues is, I guess, my point.
And we will, in our show notes, we'll put a link to the new rules of soccer with Adam, which is really funny. And the kids in that are going like, I can't believe he's going to do this to us. It's great. It's really, besides your big passion, Gary, is that you're also an intrinsic marketer, but you market to matter, which is really important.
Well, I appreciate that, but it reminds me to say also to Chris's earlier question, when we sampled consumers, so now you've got a growing organic marketplace, right? Particularly of millennial parents, right, who just are not going to compromise on what they're feeding their kids. And we sampled them and asked them about this fields project, and 76% said that they buy organic to avoid pesticides, but the same number in polling said they'd never thought about the fields where their kids play. So what we're doing here is we're kind of dimensionalizing ourselves. And what's beautiful about fields, honestly, is you don't have to buy a single cup of Stonyfield to participate. Obviously, we're helping we're giving these fields money and these towns money and technical assistance. So it's not like we're selling at people, but there's a glow that people get. There's a good feeling that they get that there's a company out there, even ahead of them, watching out for them. And that comes back around to that kind of loyalty build that I talked about earlier.
Yeah. An organic glow, not a pesticide glow.
Well,
so
well, that's true.
I stole that
also
from you, Chris.
It's also, well, see, that's funny because I was going to say it's a grassroots movement.
You guys are great.
As we have to wind this down, unfortunately, can you talk a little bit about Just Label It?
We're literally the only Western country that didn't have labeling. So, and I just felt that consumers, when they were aware that, there's this sort of pesticide, herbicide mill, they would want to know about it. I'm not inherently opposed to GMOs or genetic work per se, but I think people ought to know what they're eating and what's in it. So we created a nonprofit called Just Label It. We lobbied for years through the Obama administration to get a national labeling standard. We managed to get a bill passed in Congress. And now, and that bill required that the federal government introduce labeling rules. So at the same time, just to summarize what consumers, we all need to keep advocating for labels, and when we get a more enlightened administration, we'll be back at it to fix these rules. But in the meanwhile, consumers obviously should be looking for the non-GMO label, or more fundamentally, buy organic, because organic prohibits GMOs.
I want to go back to the Danone case, and when they say we need to learn more of what you've got, how does that knowledge transfer happen, and how do you get a larger entity to start to buy into some of these deeper vision and philosophy issues?
Yeah. Well, I joked with Carol before we started the call that I can't remember what year things happened anymore. I just try to remember which decade. And I'll say somewhere roughly a decade ago, I wrote a book called Stirring It Up, How to Make Money and Save the World, in which I profiled companies, not just in the food business, but across lots of sectors, who had demonstrated unequivocally that values equals value, that by being more environmentally responsible or more socially responsible, it actually was you made more money. And, Carol's obviously preached this forever. With Danone, there were lots of reasons they paid a very high price for our company and left me with this. But you're right. The CEO knew that, but I had to kind of persuade the next gen. And in fact, ironically, the current CEO of Danone at the time was the CFO, and he was not in favor of paying such a high price for Stonyfield, and he had to become convinced over time. So to your point, the answer, Chris, is by example. I mean, it wasn't my word. Yes, I would speak at their annual shareholder meetings, and I would work in conference rooms on acquisitions and innovations and so on. But really, what they saw was a company with a 10-point worse gross margin, growing far faster than anything in their portfolio, and making great money. And they saw a supply chain that was stable, where they're fighting, where they have declining family farmers, and where we're paying a proper price. And then they saw all the other metrics. And they're European, and the consciousness about, as is Lactalis, and the consciousness about climate is far advanced to what it is here, as it is through most of the world. And so it was really the sort of stream of examples, tangible, concrete examples. Here's the easiest way I can summarize this. I mentioned my sister. Under her leadership, we launched something called the Mission Action Program in the mid-'90s at Stonyfield. And this looked at our 360-degree footprint in all aspects: our water usage, our packaging, our shipping, our transportation, our milk, our cows, which is, by the way, the biggest climate footprint. And in every case, we created a team, an integrated team of financial people, engineers, technical people, sales, marketing, and we attacked each of those footprints. And what we discovered was every time we would reduce a footprint, for example, converting over from transporting product over long distances from truck to train, or by converting our wastewater treatment on our facility to a biogas digester that produced energy and produces heat that we use for our pasteurizing. Every one of those we had a very quick return on investment, a payback that was far faster than if we continued our sort of polluting our less conscious ways. And so by measuring all of those things, and just, with our farmers, by making sure that with organic farming, the cows eat grass, right? They're herbivores, not carnivores, and they have access to pasture. What happens is they actually literally produce less methane, which is a major global warming gas. And also, by the way, organic cows live twice as long as conventional cows, so that makes the farmers more profitable because they're healthier, right? So by measuring all of these things religiously, and again, we did this because we needed to, whenever you make a claim to a consumer that you're standing for this or that value, you've got to defend it. Because you're inviting cynicism. You're inviting certainly your competitors, journalists, bloggers, others to challenge you. And so we needed to know what we were talking about. And so the metrics were critical to our marketing, but it ended up being very persuasive to Danone and certainly to Lactalis.
So one of the other things that we do kind of as we wrap up is ask folks to just kind of share 3 key insights that they would give to other people as they're starting their journey, at the top of the company or in the middle somewhere to bring an organization towards their purpose. So what are the top 3 things you'd recommend?
Well, the first, and now I can say, this was a hypothesis when we set out, but now it's proven, is that when you inculcate values that are meaningful to your consumer into your business, you will get loyalty as a result. And loyalty is the holy grail of consumer products, right? Getting people to not even look at another yogurt, but just to grab for yours. And that comes from not just talking, but doing. So that's one. Number 2 is, you have to believe in yourself. I mean, I believe that, a lot of this stuff is, when we set out, like I said earlier, there was no supply, there was no demand. But my lesson in hindsight is, determination is probably the most undervalued and essential element for success. That has to come from inside. You can't get that from focus groups and from external stimulation. You've got to really believe in the values that you're leading with. And I guess the third is that, this is all eminently worth doing. I mean, we have a planet in peril. We are making ourselves sicker. We got into this, as I said earlier, through a whole series of small efforts, and this is small steps, and this is how we're going to get out. But business is the most powerful force on the planet. It has the greatest power to concentrate resources to do good. And so, I would just say, I guess in summary, we're all compost eventually, right? So, why not dedicate your business resources to doing something that's better for the world? It will build loyalty. It will build profits, and you might just do some good while you're at it.
And talk a little bit about why is that important today for companies to become B Corps?
Yeah, it's a great question because, when Jay first came up with the idea B Corp, I believe I was the first company he called. This was whenever it was. And I, at the time, said, gee, I don't know, Jay. I don't know. I mean, we're doing all of this anyways, and I'm not sure and people know who we are and they know what we're doing. And I don't think we need the extra cost and hassle of another certification. And then, so we passed. And along the way, to his and his colleagues' credit, he really built this brand. And what he did was he turned to companies who weren't known for their values and helped them to create a kind of an identifying mark, but also a credible, a sort of a third-party validation, a set of standards that the company committed to. And it's really become necessary because I think people in the know, I don't know that many consumers know B Corp, as many as probably will over time. But for those who do, it's really a mark of a commitment but more importantly, of an achievement. And so I think it's now become very important. And the company, after I was out as a day-to-day executive, the company said to themselves, listen, we don't have, Gary sort of leading the charge with this stuff every day. We're one of those companies that needs to remind people that we stand for these things. So that's why it was embraced. And I'm glad they did.
How do you feel being back at the, leadership position at Stonyfield now that you're 400 million. I've seen you talk about maybe you're going to go to 1 billion. How do you feel about that?
Well, look, I love it. I mean, to be very clear, I have influence without responsibility, which talk about holy grails. That's kind of it, right? I mean, I get to come in. I mean, the CEO of the company is a fantastic guy who was my marketing VP, by the way. And many of the people are folks I hired. And so, of course, I love, you always love your company, right? I was heartbroken the way it was being not as well cared for under the prior ownership. But now, we're growing beautifully. There's a lot of, the new owner, as I said, has really sort of doubled down on our values. But it's also incredibly satisfying to see someone else running it. I mean, one of the things that, as a kind of and I've heard Ivan talk about this at Patagonia is, when nothing happens, when it only happens when you're running it, then it's suspect, right? You want to see other people embracing the values because they make sense. And the launch of the Stonyfields project and some of the really amazing innovations happening in packaging and new products and just the absolute embrace of organics. It's just unbelievably satisfying to see the next gen running with it.
Who do you admire besides, we talked about Patagonia, we talked about Cliff Bar. Who do you admire as other companies do, really bringing purpose into the center of their operations, and why?
Yeah. Well, those two are top of my list. I love the folks at Organic Valley who have really embraced the family farmer, and they've built George Seaman, the CEO there, or actually he goes by CEEIO. They have, it's $1 billion co-op. I mean, they have really shown, and this is all while conventional farmers are failing. Denise Morrison was someone I really admired at Campbell's. I'm sorry she's out. I worked with Denise on a number of acquisitions and deals. She was terrific. I do see a whole generation of younger or earlier stage entrepreneurs coming up who I admire for their their vigor, for their energy. Some are really tiny. Carol, and this is a good chance for me to make my plug. I run this Entrepreneurship Institute every year. It's June 6th and 7th this year in Boulder. It's called the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute. You can see it at hirshberginstitute.org. But, I get 200 entrepreneurs who show up every year for this thing. And we go into, the nitty gritty of marketing and organizational management and so on. So I get to see and frankly admire dozens of these young up and comers and get really, really inspired by them.
Oh, that's great. That's terrific. So you have been so gracious with your time and your storytelling and your candor. We really appreciate it. And so, Chris, any last question or comment for Gary?
I'm great. This was a really, really great session, Gary. I really appreciate it. And I super appreciate you explaining how your corporate culture works.
So we want to wrap this up. Thank Gary Hirshberg, Chief Organic Optimist of Stonyfield Organic Yogurt. And we'd like to leave this question with our listeners. What's your purpose? Thanks. Listen in again soon.
Bye, everybody.